Hello, this is Will the Werewolf, and this is Werewolf the podcast. I hope you enjoy listening to the other episodes. This is a story I'm just recounting about one of my, kills during my teenage years. I like to look back on them sometimes, especially ones that had a bit of a twist. I am 15 years old and just out enjoying my wolfie form on a casual killing, out of town type of thing. I'd been following two dumbass kids who were carrying dumbass camping equipment just to see if I could have some dumbass fun with them. If they decided to spend the night in the wild, they would receive a wild night from me as a reward. A wild night in the sense that I would be a wild animal slaughtering my prey. So cool having actual prey. It made me feel all like powerful and stuff. I follow them as my humble, humy self until they arrive in a small valley that is heavily wooded and entirely off the beaten track. Perfect, says my Fenrir. Within the local area, these small valleys are called dells. They are a common feature of this bumpy countryside and a great place to hide and get lost in. They have set up camp very badly. They have pitched their £20 dumbass cheapo tent and are initially in that dumbass tent. I liked to make my stories up for these moments at this young age by giving the the characters' names and backstories to enjoy the whole process a little more. If they are just unknown individuals, then it wasn't, the same to kill them. No anti-emotional empathy and stuff. It also adds like a context for me. I have no idea who the kids are or what the actual story of the night is, but this is the one I have given to add spice. Brian and Dave have both told their parents that they are staying at the other one's home so they can go camping in the little hell of a dell. Those crazy kids, my posit says as I tell him the story. He's always very supportive about these things and sits on his haunches being his huge mother-loving self, but an interested huge mother-loving self. They seem to be about, 15 years old, judging by the acne and the pungentiosity. But who can tell with kids going through puberty at 9 years old and stuff? I blame it on hormones in the water, maybe. Brian is fat and Dave is thin. Sorry if I'm offending anyone. And in some ways, apart from the outfits, they resemble a young, spotty version of Laurel and Hardy. For those who know who Laurel and Hardy are, obviously. Otherwise, they look like a thin, spotty kid and a fat kid. They have made themselves a fire, and they were obviously never in the Scouts as it's badly made, being mainly firelighters and dead matches. With the crap fire, they've moved on to doing adolescent shit. You know what I mean by adolescent shit. Talking about girls and tits, smoking herb, talking about tits and drinking Tenants Extra. Oh, and talking about tits. They seem to have a real fascination for tits. I support them in that. Not support tits, and it's God. That's a bra that supports tits, but it's tits. Well, tits are very nice. Sorry, got a bit distracted there from the thought of tits. Well, it's going to be a fun night for them, Fenrir says as he looks away from me to the two boys. Right, let's get down to doing some psychological scarring things, Will. He always uses my name when being a teacher. At this point, I'd got bored with the storytelling and my werewolf ADHD had kicked in and I just wanted to kill them. I have to remind myself that I need to take my time and enjoy the moment. It's all about the experience and not just the medieval brutality of the outcome. I want to hurt them, mentally and physically. I need to remember the cruelty that I enjoy and employ it correctly. I've read a lot of horror writers. They have very little on my level of torment and sedition. Very few of them have actually lived the processes that I use in my art. They have not done the things that they used their imaginations to describe. I have done all of the things and applied the things I describe. You will get an actual description of how the human body and psyche can be crushed and how it reacts to being ravaged by me. 'Cause I've done all the things I am going to tell you about. I genuinely get bored by the Saw movies and stuff. I know how people come apart and it's not like that. I know that someone with a crushed ribcage can't talk. I know how long they will survive for after being damaged. I know if you pierce a lung of a person, that person cannot then scream. Honestly, it is as if none of these horror writers has ever done the field research. Each story I recount describes the art form that I work in. I live it and always try to push the boundaries. It took a lot of effort to get to my level of torture and violence. This particular story is a description of one of my teenage kills, so it will get better. I promise. The kills, that is. To carry on with the theme above, I also have to tell you that humans are really frail and easy to kill. Man, you guys amaze me that you actually make it through a single day. A slight bump of the head or a bite of a bug and it's over. It's a miracle that you've turned into the plague you have. So I also know how to do just enough hurt not to end a life. Later in my journey, I would often let my art live after the piece was created. That way it would continue to develop. I would check in now and again on my developing work to experience the new directions that it had taken after my initial input. Now, back to my teenage kicks. I absorb my posit and take my big, wonderful wolf form. We've now combined Fenrir and me and our minds work in sync. I start to circle the camp, breaking random twigs on purpose and giving an audible little growl here and there. Every now and again I had a quick burst of movement to provide a fearful rustle in the bushes. They're thick as fuck. Thick as very, very thick things. They're ignoring it or not aware of it, so I up the ante and let out a little, I'm embarrassed to say it, admit it, pathetic howl. They stop talking and listen. All conversation and descriptions about Susie, spelt with a Z. You might wonder how I know it's spelt with a Z. I just fucking know. She just had to be spelt with a Z. Susie. Well, the conversation of her and her tits is gone. The can of lager stays at the lips of one boy as he tries to see into the darkness outside the circle of firelight. Now they are aware that something untoward, a great word untoward, is happening, and I can feel the blood start to quicken in their veins. Their heartbeats have become audible, and they beat excitingly like the bass drum of a death metal band. I could smell the adrenaline dumped into their now frightened systems. It oozes out of them with their freshly produced sweat. I sense a change in their general state as they begin that prey species staple, the stress response. Cortisol is now being pumped into the blood vessels of these soppy boys. It really adds to the excitement of this exciting evening, making it way more exciting. What was that? One of them asks, his head rotating back and forth, searching the dark woods for something. They always ask the same shitty questions. If this was a film with a comedic bent and not just a shitty podcast, there would be a loud ding and some freehand graphics, maybe in a dope graffiti style, that would write up, "The first question is, what was that?" in big purple letters. Honestly, if I had £1 for every time I heard that, I would have, well, literally a few £100 because I do this kind of thing quite a lot. Well, maybe not hundreds, but probably 100-ish. The only sound now for the dumb monkeys is the distant traffic of the local main road and the wood being consumed by the somewhat meagre fire. Big pop! Suddenly one of the logs in the fire gives a massive crack as the moisture that it contains vaporizes, and it sends sparks and embers flying out of the fire pit. The shock of the sound causes the boys to leap to their feet and then freeze open-mouthed, listening for more. After a breathless few moments, they relax, and then both laugh at their actions, sit down and return to their conversation about Susie, with a Z's, huge and wonderful, double D's. As all this goes on, I lie quietly resting my head between my paws and watch them as they calm themselves in the monkey way by being obnoxious to each other. I believe this is called banter, and consists of them mocking each other in a friendly manner about them being more scared than the other. It's not amusing in this werewolf's humble opinion, and involves a lot of pretense about sexual conduct between the boys and the other boy's respective mother. The stress hormones in their blood begin to fall as the alcohol level increases, and for a moment I let them enjoy the relief and the dopamine boost that they get as the flight, fight or freeze response wears off. These primates congratulate themselves on surviving a howl and a big pop. Sorry, that pop was not big enough, it was more like POP! They laugh and giggle as they find reasons for what they've just heard, blaming it on a girl called Alice, who apparently is a bit of a dog. They laugh at the fact that this poor young woman should only be allowed to walk the woods at night away from the ordinary people in society. See, these people are just awful like everyone else. Oh, the humanity. Nah, you're all nothing and deserve to die. I just get to enjoy it. As they start to relax again, they put music on through a cheap cassette player. Those of you who are too young to know what a cassette player is, then either Google it or replace it with a more modern music player using your restricted imagination that you have, you young person you. They continue with the chatting and then drinking as though nothing had happened, not very bright. Then they seal their deaths as Def Leppard starts to be played. Oh, you can YouTube them too if you fancy. Well, no, that's not true. What am I saying? They were going to die anyway, but they have naff tasting music, so they will be even more harshly dealt with. As the soundtrack for the evening, I must admit that it's pretty annoying and takes me away from the enjoyment of the situation. What is it with Def Leppard? I just don't get it. You look and listen to like Zeppelin and Sabbath. Please check them out if you are a musical philistine who are really talented artists that are cool and creative, and then listen to this Def Leppard rubbish. You have to question how that happened. Sorry, my apologies, I've gotten away from the story at hand. I keep forgetting that this type of murdering thing is something not ordinary for you. See, I get easily distracted these days with pathetic music. I rise from my prone position and slowly and silently stalk towards the camp through the deep shadows. They're both sitting outside the red tent on deck chairs facing the fire, chatting amiably and casting aside the detritus of their snacks into the natural world around them. These are perfect examples of dirty human scum, littering and polluting with waste and plastics without a care. Oh, I know some of you very carefully take your bags for life back to the supermarket to save the planet. You have the Prius and try to reduce your carbon footprint, but you have Quentin and Tia, your kids, who are a massive carbon footprint in themselves. You got a dog for the kids, and with that, you get the equivalent of a 4-wheel drive that your Prius replaces. Just your existence in such numbers makes this planet the hottie that it is. Actually, you polluters deserve death, never mind the musical choices or the obnoxiousness. I'm not justifying myself here, by the way. I like to kill because it brings me pleasure. It is nice to have a reason, though. If these were tree-hugging hippies cleaning the area and filtering the carbon dioxide from the air with their oxygenated bong, sadly, then I would still kill them just because it's fun to kill hippies too. I approach the camp in my wolf form, head low to the ground. My senses are turned into the two of them. I know them at this moment unlike anyone who has ever known them. I enter the camp, bang opposite to them from the surrounding woodland. I carefully walk on giant paws, making no noise, even though I am shouldering my way through the thick undergrowth that surrounds the clearing. I see how close I can get to them before they spook at my presence. I'm waiting for that glorious moment of disbelief and then shock as they see me standing opposite them. The moment where the doubt turns into terror, then the terror turns into a blind panic. The moment where they make their individual choices on how they will respond. Freeze, fight, or flight. I replace them with a fecking futile freakout of different types. Let's pause and focus on me, beautiful me, just before this happens. Let me describe myself in wolf form. I have imbibed my Fenrir, my posit, and God, I look good. I have an entirely matte black pelt, not with the conditioned shiny hair of your lovely black Labrador's smooth coat, but covered in something similar to soot blackened wire wool. The outer hairs are very rough and thick and are quite protective if tested by blade or tooth. I know that because it has been tested. Below these wiry guard hairs is a soft black furry fur. I think that it is an insulating layer for warmth, and it also keeps me toasty even in the coldest of cold situations. I find it also somehow keeps me cool in the unbearable sun. I mean, it's weird if you think about it. A black pelt being cool in the noonday sun, it's definitely unphysics. My black pelt absorbs even the smallest amounts of lights that are managing to get through the trees from the glowing moon bitch. I am like a black hole, a wolf-shaped silhouette, a silent shadow beast that stalks the night on the darkest of them. My eyes are not red glowing nimbuses or anything like you see in the movies. Honestly, the films just do not do me any justice. My eyes are cool, yellowy green. They do not glow or anything cool like that, but I have that reflective retina thing that nocturnal animals have. It's called a tapetum. So the eyes shine with a bit of light, making them appear as if they glow. I know all this and can use it to a significant effect in spooking my prey. Oh, and seeing things in the dark too really helps. As a big ass wolf-shaped shadowy thing with glowy eyes, I can often be the last thing, and have been the last thing, many victims see. To add to this, I am huge. No, I mean fucking huge. I would use more than one sort of exclamation mark if I was to write that statement, if it were not the fact that having more than one exclamation mark signifies that the writer is falling into madness. That's what Terry Pratchett says, and he knew his shit. From my forepaws to the tip of my ears, I am 8 feet tall. That's 96 inches for you metric types. That is 2.5 meters tall. This writer is an old English educated person, not a decimal person, so 8 feet tall is right. I have no idea how long my body is from the tip of my snout to the tip of my tail or what I weighed, but I am huge! Exclamation mark, exclamation mark, exclamation mark. There, I did it. I used the multiple exclamation mark things. That apparently means I am a little mental. Who would have thought that I'm a bit mental? I have measured my paw prints after leaving them in the mud on a hunt on the night before. They measured 11.5 inches in length and 10 inches in width, which is significant. Significant. Ha! No, that's massive. What's that in centimetres? 30 long by 25 wide, roughly. Oh, who gives a damn? It's all extraneous detail that no one gives a flying fuck about. Although, it is all a little known but uninteresting fact that wolves have evolved large paws compared to their body weight so they can run over the surface of snow when hunting. They don't sink through the crust. That's an exciting fact, actually, yeah? So you get the idea that in my wolf form, I'm big. In my wolfman form, my were form, I am even larger, but the wolf form causes more fear at the beginning in humans for some reason. I guess it may be the DNA that stores the fear of the wolf predator in the human. Those ancestors of the modern monkey who flew before those primordial packs saved the horror of the outline of the wolf in their DNA. You could believe that if you find the modern research that says that memories can be stored in the DNA. Humans did experiments on cute little white mices. Basically, they had a section of a cage that electrocuted the mice if they walked on it. You lovely kind humans, you. After a while, the mice avoided the painful part. Makes sense. Then the mice that had these experiences was bred, and the offspring of the mice were put into the cage without the parents. Somehow, the offspring, they knew that they should avoid that corner of the cage. They weren't taught this fact. Neither did they learn to avoid this section of the cell through experience. There must be memories then in past DNA. Clever things found through torturing small creatures. You humans are so great. Memories of wolfmen do not really get stored in this way. You're pretty sure to die if you see a wolfman though. Right. Had to get that out of the way so you can use your imagination of yours to see in your mind's eye what these two no ones saw. What did I name them again? What is it? I called them Dave and Brian. What Dave and Brian started to see as I slowly emerged from the rhododendron undergrowth, not far from their fire, was an enormous wolf. It does not sound all that scary written there, but oh, I am sure it was for these two young gentlemen. I edged forward, just waiting for that moment when they first saw me. Honestly, it is extraordinary to see it when people do. They often do that double take thing that you've seen hundreds of times on your cartoon TV programs. You know, the one where they first turn their heads and see something and carry on normally in whatever they were doing, then suddenly realise what they may have seen and then look back again but really quick. Wile E. Coyote does it all the time when the nasty bully roadrunner tricks him into traps. Dave saw the shadow of me first. I don't know how much of me he saw, but I don't think I was too far into the firelight at this point, so I think he just saw a black wolf head and a pair of shining eyes. Well, be honest, it doesn't matter how much he saw because he just froze solid. I have excellent gaydar and an even better 3F star. The 3Fs are how a person responds to a situation that the body deems immediately dangerous. Your body, when it feels imminent danger, dumps a mixture of hormones into your system that then allows you to try to make the best decision out of just these three: flight, freeze, or fight to save themselves. I've already sensed that these guys would be the freeze types. It tends to be the case with the young and inexperienced. I don't know. Maybe it's a lack of danger in their lives or a lack of experience in general, but they tend to choose the most stupid one of the three. I genuinely think that they have just not had enough near-death experiences and default to the lazy one, as laziness has not hindered their protected little insignificant lives so far. It is, in fact, also the most boring one for me, to be honest. Yes, it is the freeze response. Yawn. He just stared right at me with his big flappy mouth hung open like a complete idiot. He almost put me off my appetite. Now, the key to the following action was to disappear from his sight before he could make his friend aware of me. He would then be a freaked out individual who had been drinking and doing drugs, trying to convince his mates that a giant black wolf was standing at the edge of the fire that his friend could or did not see. This is an amusing 5 minutes of anyone's time. The secret is to withdraw slowly and silently while maintaining eye contact with the person that has spotted you. That way, they don't usually make their friend aware until you break eye contact again. A quick movement snaps the prey out of the freeze response into the utter panic of the moment, so I slowly withdrew back into the bushes and moved to the opposite side of the clearing to watch the next few moments. The beer can fell from Dave or Brian's hand. I can't remember who I assigned what name to right now, and it fell to the ground where it spilt its precious contents on the dry mud of the clearing. The other one stopped talking and quickly grabbed for the emptying can on the floor, cursing his buddy for spilling its precious contents and telling him how hard it was to get this stuff from the shop. The can dropper was oblivious to all this as he just pointed in the direction of where I had been. Then, without removing his eyes from where I had been, he tried to talk. I just saw this huge thing there, said the first dummy. He calls me a huge thing? A huge thing, is that it? I'm at least a colossal wolf or dog, you moron. I frustratingly felt that these two were actually too stupid for this to be fun, so I considered ending it right with teeth and claws. They were obviously too idiotic to make this any fun. It was a black dog with eyes staring at me. It just stood there, he told his friend, pointing to where I'd just been. The other boy started to laugh at his mate, who he felt had obviously succumbed to the drink and the drugs, or maybe he was trying to scare him or something. Yeah, right, William, said the disbeliever, and I saw your mum's pussy staring at me the other night during Coronation Street, he countered. It's got big eyes. He must have realised something was wrong when his young friend did not respond to this taunt. Then the not Brian but William just kept staring where I had been, bless him. His friend actually became quite concerned and wanted to reassure him. You're drunk and seeing things, dude, he told him, reaching out and patting his arm. William recoiled from the touch and looked at his pal. No, man, that was real. You trying to scare me, Will? He laughingly said. William's eyes slowly returned to the spot I had been in moments ago. No, mate, there was this huge dog right there, just stood staring at me just right there, repeated William as he turned to face his mate, looking at him right in the eye and standing up to emphasise the point. Have you dosed me or something? He paused, his anger growing. You've given me something, you trippy bastard, haven't you? Exclaimed the now furious young William. Dave, at this point, just sat staring at William, and he looked deep in thought and very confused. No, mate, definitely not. Mark had nothing left. No, mate, honest, I would not do that to you anyways. That would be too uncool, he replied. His body language showed that he meant what he was saying, and that he was getting a little concerned about what was happening. So, what the fuck did I see then? Said William. Wow, anger's cool. That's a rare emotion to see at this point from a monkey, an infrequent response for this type of situation. People sometimes get angry at being scared, and my little mate here hid his fury well. He was also going to blame it all on his friend. Little dark-minded bastard. I was actually quite impressed with him. What was that then, Rich? Shouted the angry William, not Dave, but Rich. I don't know, mate. I saw now at all. Nothing to do with me. You're just smashed, mate. Sit down. You nothing out there. It's 'cause you're a psycho, mate. Those drugs your doctors have you on do weird crap to your mind, innit? He laughed, but nervously. I could tell that William was a little unstable, and maybe Rich had been on the end of that instability before. The angry lad, hugging himself, stared down at his friend. His hands were flexing, and he considered his next move. Once more he looked back to where I had been, and sat down in angry silence, snatching the can out of Rich's hand. This explanation by his friend seemed to mollify the boy. Excellent! William was the mental case, and I got to play with that. Eventually the conversation between the two boys started again, and everything became friendly and cordial. As Rich passed him a poorly rolled joint and he lit it for him, my presence was soon forgotten. This particular kid must have psychosis if he was willing to think that seeing me was just one of those things that happened inside his head. This was going to be great. He would not be able to work out if I was real or imaginary. So now I needed him to feel my presence and get them to a point of hopelessness. God, I crave it. One problem I have now that was not an issue then is the invention of the fucking mobile phone. Honestly, this is one little invention that has made life so difficult for me. People have to now be somehow stopped from using them in these scenarios these days. If my possible victim gets one chance to make a quick phone call, it can ruin my evening and make these little dioramas that I so carefully build have to end quickly without any of the long drawn out psychological torture that I love so dearly. It's not a perfect horrific killing when you just do the physical torture to people. Oh, and don't get me wrong, it's fun, but it's like having quickie sex. It's good, but does not have the whole fulfilling thing of romance and decent foreplay and all that bollocks I've heard of. So mobiles can be a real issue. Not only because people can phone, but they can take photos and film. This was a time when they were rare in this story. So you could not guarantee that they had them or didn't have them. So annoying. But these guys defo had nothing to call for help with except their voices. The good old days. So now I add the fear slowly without them really panicking too quickly to try and bolt or run off. It's a bit like boiling the frog. You know the idea, well, I hope you know the idea. The story goes if you put a frog into boiling water, you are not only a dick, but it will try to escape by jumping from the water. It's an accurate tale, as I know because I've tried it. They try and jump out of the pot really fast, so you have to have a deep pan and a shallow bit of boiling water to stop them from leaping out. Also, if you put the lid on, you can watch the frog smash its head against the glass before it dies. It's impressive to hear them pop when they cook. They pop like popcorn. If you think about it, the internal organs are, I suppose, in a sealed bag, which pops when the heat expands them. You get a frog soup, but don't eat it. Honestly, it tastes disgusting. I've done the boiling pot experiment with a few different animals. It's not just frogs that do the jumping. Most species try to escape. On the other hand, if you put the frog in the pot and then slowly increase the temperature over a long period, the frog will just sit there and get boiled without any panic. It does not notice the fact that it is being cooked slowly. Cats, funnily enough, do feel the slow temperature change and still try and get out the pot as you add heat. I hate cats. The reason I hate them is not that I'm a dog-like thing and that it's what you're supposed to do. It's because I think they're just arrogant, stuck-up creatures with too much self-importance. Why do so many cats disappear in this area, never to be found? Because of me, that's why. I like to microwave them or poison them. A cool fact is that Welsh for microwave is poppety ping. Cool, huh? Sorry, back to the story. So what I had to do was slowly ramp up the fears so they just accept it and do nothing rash to end it too quickly. The good thing was they were drunk and stoned, so they really would not want the attention of parents or police unless it was a life or death situation. Sadly for them, it was not. It was just a death situation that they were in. I planned to play on William's broken mind. Work on him and let him be the centre of the fear generated. I liked his anger produced emotion, and it would be great to build on this to see if I could make him hurt his friend in response to it, or run, or maybe do crazy things that I wouldn't expect. Human emotions are so much fun to play with. One of my favourite times to play with someone's fears is when they're struck by a call of nature. Humans tend to do that away from others when they need to do it, so it's a good way of getting to know them on a one-to-one level a little better. So when I saw William put down the can, leave his seat and start walking to the edge of the firelight, I knew it was an opportunity to add slightly to the fear. His eyes were adjusted to the light of the fire, and it would take a while for him to get his poor human night vision going, so I knew I'd have to be quite close to him for him to see me. As he undid his flyer and rummaged and focused on removing his bits from his trousers, I slowly worked my way up towards him. I was silent, and I was unseen. He sighed a deep sigh of relief as he started to urinate. He only then realised that the tree next to him was actually Wolf. I think he may have slightly soiled himself as he leapt back in shock and peed all over himself. I burst away into the dark, making an incredible amount of noise as I disappeared into the bushes. I smiled as I jogged away at a reasonable distance, leaving behind a screaming, swearing William sat in a puddle of his own urine. He was sat there wondering what had just happened. Chaos broke out on the campsite. Shouting and flapping was in full swing from both parties. I had to be ready now, just in case. William was still on the floor at this point and was scrambling back towards the fire. His loose pants were now around his ankles. They had been dragged down his legs as he pulled himself along the ground. He was pointing in the direction of his urination and yelling nonsense. "Who's there? Is that you, Cal? Stop messing about. Come on, man, this isn't funny," was shouted into the night. He was wrong on 2 counts. There was no Cal, and it was funny. I was finding it hilarious. Rich at this point had got to his feet and was looking over in the direction of the pointed finger. He walked over to William, started to gesture, and joined in him asking the "not there" Cal in the darkness to stop messing about and come out. They kept repeating how it wasn't funny, man, and Cal just needed to show himself. Then I noticed him almost too late. There's another fucking human, and he was making his way noisily towards the site. William at this point had stood up and pulled his pants up after falling down again several times in his haste. Once in his pants, he rushed to his pack where he dug out a knife. With the knife in hand, he stared, shouting into the darkness that he was going to have it. The person making his way towards the camp stopped when he heard this commotion, and he began to shout back to the scared boys. "Hey guys, it's me, Carl!" shouted. Well, I guess it was Carl. Silence descended in the camp as relief swept over them. It had been their friend all along that had been doing a prank. Phew. As Carl moved forward, I slowly and silently snuck up behind him as he continued talking to the guys. He had no idea I was there. The light cast from his torch gave no night vision, and on top of that, his focus was entirely on the camp. "I'm here, Rich!" Carl shouted again. "I managed to get away just now, being a pain in the ass, to get backside to get out. My man was having none of it. Left after she went to sleep. All right if I come in?" I could not see the camp but could smell the relief of the boys. "Stop messing about then, Carl, and get here, mate. It's been a weird one. This weed is super strong. You got us been seeing stuff," said Rich, laughing a little. Carl was only a few yards away from the clearing now, so I made a snap decision. Literally a snap decision. I snapped up Carl gently around the waist with my mouth, well, as gently as I thought I could, and still keeping him from escaping, I held him. As my jaws held him, he in response started screaming and flapping around like a flappy thing. To pacify him a little, I gave him a shake and slowly carried him away from the camp, hoping only the boys would hear the screaming and that there was no one else in the local vicinity that may take an interest. I could not see the effects the sounds of their dying friend would have on the two of them, but they would either think that Cal was still taking the piss or that he was in actual, horrific, real trouble. I imagine it must have been horrible to hear their friends' cries for help and screams of pain disappear into the distance slowly, or just infuriating if they thought he was trying to fool them again. I had bitten a little harder than I thought. Quite a lot of blood started to enter my mouth. The screaming and shuddering boy seemed to deflate and go limp in my jaws. He wasn't dead. He'd done that weak-minded thing of just giving up hope when he could not escape. Always a disappointment in my eyes. No fun to be had with him now. So I bit hard, crunching through his lower spine and his guts and shaking him apart, back and forth with the action of my head, showering the local vicinity with his guts and spattered fecal matter. Finally, I threw his legless and lifeless torso on the floor and ate a little before returning to the main meal. After eating, I left his remains in a pile and trotted back to the camp to check where the other two had got to. In a perfect world, the two of them would have broken into a panicked run. I could have done with a chase. A bit of exercise would have been nice. But when I got back to the camp, the two guys were huddled together in the centre of the clearing near the fire, back to back. They were now shaking and crying, not knowing what to do and sadly not running. Obviously, the sounds that they heard during the kill had not sounded like Cal was joking. It must have seemed absolutely real. They were there now, one with a knife, one with a stick, both looking very scared. The music was still playing and neither of them was speaking. After a few more moments, they began to talk to each other, trying to convince themselves that Cal was still playing some kind of trick on them. They were shouting at the now dead boy, telling him to quit it. They were shouting about how they would kill him when he revealed himself. A bit late there, guys. Cal, come on, stop messing about, please! They kept this up for a while. I lay down to watch the scene for a bit, my head laid between my forepaws once more. This is the bit in the horror movie you don't see, the bit where the victims slowly stop panicking and start to try and work out what to do next due to the lack of Cal's appearance. Oh God, Rich. Oh Jesus, man, what the heck are we going to do? What the hell are we going to do? Warbled the terrified William. This was going perfectly for me. What are we going to do? Asked Rich in reply. We're getting out of here, Rich. Grab your kit. Forget the other stuff, said William, motioning a direction out the camp. Now, I had no worries. These guys had no way to draw the attention of anyone outside this little set-piece drama. This was where I would really start to crank up the levels of fear and despair. I set to silently circle the camp, stopping every now and again to cause the rustle of a bush, or to add a little guttural snort or roar. Random scary noises from many directions. Pumping up the fear, I would quickly burst through the undergrowth near the camp, always close to but not visible to the boys. All this effort would be worth it when they realised there was no avenue for escape. They again had stopped what they were doing and stood transfixed, only their heads spinning like tops, desperately searching to see what was making the noise. It must have been incredibly scary not knowing where I was or even how many of me there were out there. They felt surrounded and alone. Perfect. Wordlessly, they both sat down in their respective chairs and looked out into the night. Hope had gone. They had mentally quit. It would be short-lived initially, but gave me an almost narcotic high. These stuck little dumb monkeys were giving me a buzz that I really lived for. I slowly walked out of the woods into the campsite opposite them again, nose to the floor and sniffing the ground. I pretended not to notice them. It seemed I'd just walked into the clearing by sheer accident, but they had definitely seen me. They were both frozen, muscles locked solid with rictus grins on their faces, horrified. William's fingers were twitching as he clutched at his knife, and Rich sat with his knees drawn up under his chest, mumbling the mantra, "Oh God, oh God, oh God," under his breath. I raised my head and looked at them closely for a long while. No threat was offered, just looking with interest at them to gauge a general reaction. They both just sat there, nothing much happening, except the faint trickle of urine running from Rich's trousers. "Oh crap, oh crap, oh crap," kept repeating Rich, his eyes never leaving me. The braver of the two, William, started to move forward out of his chair. Slowly, inch by inch, he was trying to stand while remaining crouched. I couldn't believe that he was actually getting out of his seat. What a brave monkey. I simply curled my lip in response to this, revealing a set of carving knives for teeth, and then started to growl. The growl was a low rumble and played on the boy's monkey brain like a harp. I have a recording of my wolf growl. It's amazing. Well, sorry. Someone recorded me growling before they, stopped recording it. I simply listen to it on playback every now and again. It sets that part of, the human's DNA on fire. The worst sound the prey part of a human can hear is it rattles and shakes and terrifies. It's a simple warning to behave, to back off and to comply. William sat back down again quickly. I stopped my growl and raised my head like an average dog. I cocked it to one side, raising my left ear as though wanting to listen to them. I panted and yawned as though I was a semi-relaxed mutt. I was trying to give them the wrong impression that it would all be okay. Allow them to relax a little so that I could bring them back to the edge of terror once more when I wished. Then, without forewarning, I rushed forward and grabbed. I moved so fast that the boys had no time to react. I snatched Richie's ankle and felt the crunch of bone against my carnassial teeth. I dragged the boy screaming from the chair to the ground, where he ineffectually tried to pull away from me. This achieved extra tearing of flesh and increased the acute pain that he was in. He screamed louder still as the bones of his lower leg ground against my teeth. I could play him like an instrument of pain. I shook his now twisted and broken leg gently. My teeth were ripping through his flesh, and I enjoyed flinging him around like the toy he was. I then just simply let go and backed off, licking my jaws clean of blood and maintaining a simple look of interest in the boys, openly sniffing the air. As you can probably imagine, the mess that was his leg was bleeding quite heavily, and Rich was kind of reaching for it, voicing his agony. The shock and the violence of what had just happened were made apparent by his horrific but music-like vocals. It was like a sonata for my soul. I moved away once more and sat back on my haunches and just looked at them. I showed no pretense to fear and offered no threat. I just sat down and paid them still more interest. With my lunge for Rich, William had thrown himself backwards over the chair and onto the floor. He now desperately tried to bundle himself back into some sitting position while never taking his eyes off me. He was listening to his damaged friend screaming, and his own tears were filling his eyes. "William, help me please, for God's sake, help me, William," Rich pleaded before he burbled into like a snotty damp silence. Tears were running from William's eyes as he mumbled like a distressed child, not knowing what to do next. I tried to control William's mind. I tried to put the next thought straight into his context. "Run, William, run, please run." He didn't. He slowly stood up, using his right hand on the back of the chair to steady himself. His left hand pointed towards me with his knife. His weapon was weaving around like a drunk in a ceilidh. However, he was definitely pointing it in my direction. I was impressed. This was an incredibly rare reaction on the part of the average human, and part of the reason why I'm telling you the story. They never do this. On the other hand, Rich did the usual. He just lay propped on an elbow, crying and pathetic. "Wow, William, you are a pure psychotic little devil. I actually like you." I moved forwards towards Rich again, sniffing along the floor, and got to within touching distance of his leg. Keeping one eye on the knife-wielding William, I touched Rich's foot with my nose and sniffed it, and started to lick at it, removing the build-up of blood that gathered there. As I licked at the injury, I could see it hurt and freaked Rich out. He cried again, shouting out at me, "Get away from me!" He raised himself from his back to his hands and started to move backwards, dragging himself along the floor. I stopped him from moving by gently putting my paw above the broken ankle and effectively held him so he could not move any further. "Please get off me. Please, it hurts so bad. Please get off me." He turned to his powerless friend. "William, please help me. Get it off me, please, William." Rich reached down and tried to pull his mangled leg free. I snarled and nipped at his hand, and he flinched it away. He had about enough and cried out in anguish, throwing himself flat on his back. He reached towards William with pleading arms and, getting no response, took the hat off his head, covering his own eyes with it. He must have been thinking that if he could not see me, I would not exist. Stupid humans. The blanket against the bogeyman theory, a common method of protection as a last resort. I now lay down, my paws on his legs. My body weight was holding him there as I turned my attention to William. He was just standing, shaking. He had been somewhat sensible in keeping the chair and the knife between us, but it really was a useless effort. Ignoring William, I started to take an interest in the body before me. I decided it was time to eat, reaching down and biting into the broken ankle of his friend. I ripped and tore, shaking my head back and forth and wrenching so I could remove the foot from the leg of the doomed Rich. He, throughout this process, screamed, begging for help. He also asked me to let go. I dropped the foot to the ground and stopped briefly to look at the other boy's reaction. He did nothing, just stood watching. I reached down again and carefully got hold of the material of Rich's jeans. I started to rip them off his legs. It took some effort and his body was thrown around as I did so. It was not a pleasant experience for the poor Rich as I stood on him pretty hard to extricate him from his jeans. He was not happy and did a lot of whining, screaming and retching before finally ended up on his belly in the dirt trouserless. His eyes never left his friends and he never stopped reaching towards him and screaming for his help. Once satisfied with my work, I began to eat. I bit deep into his lower leg and removed the calf muscle as a lump. The boy started wailing and kicking as I tore the flesh away from the bone and skin. It took a little while to get it clear, and then, pardon the pun, I wolfed the lump of meat down. The blood pooled on the ground. I kept looking at his friend to see his reaction. There was very little. He just stood there, licking his lips and shaking. So I carried on eating the living flesh in front of him. I was not eating the boy because I needed to feed, but just to torture his pal psychologically. This is the way wolves tend to eat. There's no killing bite from a wolf, just a long, slow death as you bleed out due to your body being consumed while living. Well, living to a point where you can't hang on anymore. There was still nothing from William chap, so I picked the body up and flicked him over onto his back. Maintaining eye contact with William, I moved up the body to his mid-torso. It was easier to get into the carcass through the guts. No bones or sinew to get through, just the muscularity of the abs and obliques. Again, I ripped the clothing off his upper body, pushing the flailing Rich down into the ground with my paws so he couldn't move. I then bit deep into his abdomen, grabbing flesh with my incisors and pulling and tearing to make a hole into which I could start to get a good grip on his guts. Rich laughingly struck out at me with his right hand, so I removed it with a simple snap of my jaws. It fell into the dirt. I continued to eat, tearing into the unfortunate Rich's guts. He screamed again, but with a little less energy and intensity. It would not be long now for him. He was very tasty, to be honest, with his extra fatty tissue. He tasted somewhat like a rare Kobe steak. It's not true that humans taste like pork. They actually taste like humans, and pork tastes like humans a bit-ish. Well, I continued eating and enjoying my meat rarer than rare. Rich, after a few more mouthfuls, had died. I picked the remainder of his body up by the torso and shook it in my mouth. The body broke into 2 bits, with smaller parts of him landing on the floor. Blood and guts and bits of Rich rained over the now shaking William, and I threw the rest of Rich to one side, a mangled heap. The fear I had given William was a gift. He would never have had the clarity that he had now. He would never have experienced anything as profound as this in such a comprehensive manner. He had not long to live, but he now really lived every moment. He was truly alive. I gave him the gift of genuinely feeling something. I then left him alone. I watched him for most of the night. I enjoy the mental torture stuff. Sometimes I like it more than the physical torture. No, that's a lie. They're both great. I spent my time trying to, understand the things that were going through William's tiny mind. I soon realised that I could never understand these weak-minded fools. Nothing could ever make me feel this way. He had gotten up and made a mental effort to leave the scene. Every time he prepared to go, I had appeared as a shadow in the night, blocking his escape route to freedom. Will's will had broken in multiple ways. Each time he appeared, his reaction had been different. The first time he saw me, the fear exposed itself as sobbing and crying and wailing. At first he would go back to the tent showing a lot of distress. There was a lot of heartfelt sobbing and a huge display of emotion, but this reduced with each encounter. This is normal. Your body can't keep up with the intensity of emotion for so long. You become flooded with adrenaline and stress hormones like cortisol. Initially, these are released in high concentrations into your blood. Then the concentrations slowly decrease over time. The monkey part of you exercises itself out. Read The Chimp Paradox. It really helped me know how to commit mental torture on my victims. The emotions displayed by a victim change over time. As this one does not work, another is tried. For example, I could now see his frustration build as I appeared to block his way. He had started talking to himself openly, the monkey side of him and the human side of himself trying to argue it out, trying to convince himself to just go. He was getting angrier each time he tried to leave, and he was turned back. Each time his resolution to go took longer to develop, and he became more emphatic that he had to go. Basically, your brain is split into chimp and human. The chimp always gets the info from the senses first. It then can make quick decisions like, look, there's a tiger, run! It chooses which of the 3 F's is needed to follow when danger is apparent. It's 5 times stronger than the human part of your brain, the actual bit of it you are, so it controls your actions quite easily. Then, if it does not need to choose an F, it considers the database of automatic responses you've stored. If you've experienced something before a few times, we may call it an automatic action. You do something without thinking about it in depth. Take driving, for example. Once you've learned to drive and got experience, you do not think about the controls when you're doing it, unless you're one of those mindfulness wankers. If there is no automatic response in the database, then it may turn it over to the human part of you to have a go at sorting it out. You are complex creatures. I don't think I have this problem. I think my animal and human are the same things, especially when linked to my posit Fenrir. Or maybe my human part is missing. I'm quite impulsive at times. Who knows? The chimp paradox. Read it and realise how screwed up you really fucking are. Anyways, back to Wil. His animal self was terrified and trying to protect him. His human self was trying to be logical. He knew he had to escape, but he would not let himself go. These humans don't realise they are now at the top of the food chain. They've not evolved the predator's brain yet, so they still act like prey species, but eventually his frustration overcame him as he walked towards me. He was actually posturing wildly. His body language was now aggressive. He looked as though he was going to try and take me on. Come on then, come on, you want me then, come and fucking get it. He was standing his ground, rolling up his sleeves, getting himself prepared. It was amazing and so interesting. He must have known he couldn't win. So to test his resolve, I walked forward to meet him. For the first time, he saw the whole of me, and his mind broke deeper again. His hands fell to his waist, and his whole body slumped. He stared up at me and realised that this was the end. That he could do nothing to stop me. The beast before him was both beautiful and terrifying. I struck a pose and looked into the boy's very soul. Then, surprisingly, out of nowhere, he uttered the beautiful words, Jesus, man, okay, you fucking bastard. And he launched himself forward. He had grabbed the knife from his belt behind his back, and he was going to fucking use it. The knife struck my pelt and was turned aside, jarring his thrusting hand. I did not move. The boy was now within inches of me. I could have just ended him there, but he was a warrior, which at this age I fucking admired. I stood and looked down at him. I gave him a little nudge with my nose gently in the chest. No threat, just a tap. He dropped his knife and prepared himself for the end. Come on, you big, ugly, fucking black, fucking furry bastard, he screamed, a flood of spittle pelting my beautiful pelt. Disgusting. Baring my teeth and letting out a voluminous growl, I showed him the full beast. My head came down to protect the throat, the ears flattened on the sides of my head, a wet maw of teeth displayed in their full and glorious state. I then relaxed, lifting my head and turned and jogged off into the trees. At a safe distance I hid and looked back to the place the boy had stood. He was still there, just standing, slack-jawed and in utter disbelief, starting to look around in all directions and scratching his head in a state of confusion. He slowly reached down for the blade at his feet, but soon thought better of it and left it there. Sensible chap. After another short while of standing in silence with only the birds singing and the traffic noise in the background, he decided it was time to go. He set off walking down the path. He looked a little drunk, but he showed no relief yet. I think he thought I was just playing with him again, but I wasn't. I followed him to the boundary of the woodland. I had the idea of finishing him off there and then, but my heart was not in it, so I let him wander onto the pavement by the road and get on his way. It was a lovely morning after all. Going back to the camp, I found my clothes stash. I changed back into my human form and tracked where William had gone. I had assumed that he had not driven, so I could trace his smell along a trail. I could sense him as he had left a trail of fear that went away from where he had been to a place he had gone. The colour of it told me a lot about how he was feeling. It was him definitely, and his smell was very different from any others I came across, so he was pretty straightforward to follow. I wandered down into the local council estate, following this kid's trail into an impoverished part of Rochdale. That's a tricky thing to do as well. I don't mean a tricky thing to follow the smell. I mean get a more impoverished part of Rochdale. Rochdale is a dirty hole. Sorry, Rochdalians, but there is a specific reason why your population is the mainstay of Jeremy Kyle. Great shows like I screwed my sister's best friend's sister's daughter and my other brother's best friend's sister's daughter got pregnant. But him living in the roughest part of Rochdale almost made me feel sorry for him. Almost. I wandered the roads until I found his door and stood in front of it for a while. I stood and thought about my next move. Then I realised it. Forget it. His life is awful. Let him live. I wonder how his experience had affected him in his life. Did he believe it had happened? Did he relive it in his dreams? I always wondered. I later found out that this kid had become the landlord of a pub that he'd called the Black Dog. He had drunk well on his story and he'd become quite a success. I always meant to go to the pub and talk to him about his experience, then maybe kill him, but to be honest, I couldn't be arsed. And that's the end of the episode. If you enjoyed it, you can always go into the description, follow the link, buy me a coffee, mine's a flat white. Other than that, there's a link to the book. Other than that, love you loads. Hope you have a nice life.